Hello everyone, it's Habiba here. I'm going to be doing a book review for you. I'll be starting with this book called The Private Apartments. So this is a Canadian book. It's by a Canadian author. Her name is Idman Nur Omar. I really love this book. So it's a short story collection that details the lives of Somali people across the world really. So we're taken across the world. We're taken to London, to Amsterdam, to Toronto, to Dubai, to so many cities that are home to Somali people. And the short story collection really reveals to us, it shows us the effect of the Somali Civil War, so 1991, and then the subsequent displacement of millions of people, and how the war and how that subsequent displacement really shaped the lives of Somali communities around the world, and the effect of that displacement generationally. All right, so I'll start by talking about the title, The Private Apartments. I really like the title. I think it's a great title. It draws you right in, and as the reader, you get the impression as if you're being let in on something intimate, something personal, an apartment, but then the private apartments. The title is telling, and the title relates very much to the content of the book, the content of the short stories, and the setting really, because all of these short stories, they take place in apartments. We're taken into the apartments, so into the homes of Somali people across the diaspora. I find that Noor, the author, is so real in her illustrations of human behavior, so real and so honest in how she illustrates certain human behaviors in her work. And she shows us how decisions motivated by trauma can be so hurtful. And so a very good example of this, what I just described, is in one of the short stories. So is in the London short story. And in that story, we have this young woman who's about to be married. She's about to be married and she has an admirer. So a man who admires her. He liked her even prior to her getting with her fiance. So prior to getting with the man whom she's about to marry, she had this interaction, she had this relationship, this kind of, basically she had a man who admired her. And so this admirer tries to hold on to her because he's very disappointed that she's getting married, and he's very demoralized. He'd rather that she gets married to him. So basically he tries to impress her with a gift of gold. He tries to impress her with a gift of gold. She accepts the gold. However, it doesn't change her decision to marry her fiance. Basically, she doesn't go with that guy, the one who's given her the gold. And now in her desire to possess something of material value, she becomes very vicious and she becomes cold. She becomes vicious and cold. And that's what stood out to me. I remember when I was reading that chapter, I just kind of paused there. I was taken aback. I just kind of paused and I sat with that and I reread it. And I reread the way Noor describes that in the chapter, the way she describes what's happening, the character. So this young woman, her name is Warda. The way she describes Warda's thought process and why she acts the way she does, it's very gripping. It's very telling. It's very gripping. And now this gold becomes the root of so many problems, right? The gold wreaks such havoc in a number of people's lives. So in Warda's life, in her husband's life, because she goes on to get married. So to the husband, and then the admirer from the past, his name's Yusuf. So he comes back sometime later after Warda has married, looking for the gold. It just creates a lot of problems, really. And she just lets the problem persist, basically. So that short story, the London short story, it's a very interesting portrayal of what I said earlier, of how certain decisions, depending on what they're motivated by. So in this case, her decision was motivated by this intense desire she has to possess something of material value, right? So to have this material possession, to have the gold, but it makes her very cold. She becomes very vicious. She compromises her morality. All right, so that's just one example. I find this collection to be very juicy. I won't give it away, I just give little examples here and there to encourage you guys to get it and to read it. And I want to say that I was drawn into this story, into these stories right from the beginning. The writing is very compelling and very easy, and we'll just have you flipping the pages to see what happens next. It'll leave you wanting for more. And one thing I really like about this story is, or about this collection rather, is how it's framed. So like I said, it's different short stories set across various cities. So I told you, we're taken to Amsterdam, we're taken to London, to Toronto, to Welland, Ontario, to Dubai. It's as if we're getting a snapshot into different moments in time. And when you read the table of contents, for example, it's Rome, 1991. So we begin in 1991. Then we're taken to 98. So we're taken over a number of years. And then we end in 2020. So it's very neat how she's done that. We start in 91. And that's the year, I'm going to double check it, but I think that's the year the Somali Civil War began. So from 91 to 2020. Something else she does that's very neat is that she gives us indicators in terms of where we are in time. In some stories, she says something about Candy Crush or maybe a CD Walkman. So it tells you CD Walkman. So you get an idea. That's late 90s, early 2000s, right? And then now, in the later years, perhaps in 2016 or in 2020, she gives us another indicator, another sign through the prose, through something in the description of setting or through something that a character is using, through an item that a character is using, that we're in a certain year. You know that, okay, we're in a different time period. So while many of the stories in this collection are distinct from one another, as I was saying earlier, it's as if we're getting different snapshots into different moments in time, different families, different stories. However, some of them are connected. And I found it really cool how she does that. And as the reader, you have to pay attention. And if you're reading closely, and like I said, I was very gripped. I was drawn into this story from the beginning. So I was paying attention. There are a few stories that are linked. So for example, the first story, we're in Rome and we meet a character named Ladan. Ladan, she's a young woman. She's recently fled Somalia. She's working in the home of an Italian woman. She's her caregiver. So we meet Ladan in Rome in 1991. And then we meet her again in 2008 in Amsterdam. Yes, we meet her in 2008 in Amsterdam. And when we meet her in 2008, she has two children. She has a teenager and then a younger one. So she has a boy and a girl. And it's really nice as a reader, I found it really nice as a reader to witness the change in her character. We see this progression because when we meet her in Rome in 91, she's a young woman. I think she's about 18 at the time. She's a new refugee in Rome. She marries an Italian. However, as you can imagine, there are all these pressures she has to contend with, being a new refugee. She's a Black African in this European country. Her marriage to the guy, it helps. It helps to relieve certain pressures, and offers her stability as this, say, refugee woman in this new place. And it's very interesting when you're reading that story at the end of it, the way Nur, the author, describes the internal state of Ladan at the wedding. The chapter ends at the wedding. Her brother doesn't attend the wedding because he's not in support of it. However, the brother's wife and the baby attends. And now she describes the wedding scene to us and how Ladan, how she's feeling. I won't describe it to you. You guys can go read it yourself. But how she's feeling and her state of mind, and as a reader, we can tell she's rather in a daze because there's so much happening. There's so much happening. She has all these pressures. There's so much on her mind, right? So there's a lot going on. And then we meet her in Amsterdam in 2008. So that's, what is that, 17 years later. We meet her 17 years later, and she's changed. Now she's a more mature woman. She has these 2 children. She's really in charge of everything. She's in charge of her circumstances more than she was in Rome. Let's put it that way. She's taking care of her children. She's a single mom, and she's able to help others, from the Somali community. There's an elderly man whom she takes to. She just sort of takes to him and sort of barges into his life. That's the impression we get. That's how she describes it as the author. But barges into his life in a nice way, because, you know, he's a single elderly man and she just kind of wants to help him out and take care of him. And then she ropes in her daughter to help in taking care of him. And now, at the same time, we realize that while Ladan, so a more mature Ladan, while she's very much in charge and very much confident, and she's very much her own woman, taking care of her children and so forth, and she's an interpreter in Amsterdam, we realize that she has this, she has what I'd call a deep-seated insecurity or a deep-seated fear around how her children will relate to her, whether basically they'll stick around and be there for her as she gets older, you know, once her children grow up. So there's that deep-seated fear she has. And we learn of that fear through her relationship with this elderly man whom she takes care of, because his children they're elsewhere. Let me just put it that way. They're elsewhere for various reasons, you know. As a matter of circumstance, his children could not be with him. So he's an elderly refugee on his own in Amsterdam. She takes to him and she begins visiting him all the time and so forth. And she's always questioning him around his kids and where are your kids and how come they're not with you? How come you're alone? That kind of stuff. And she has this deep-seated anxiety that perhaps her fate may be the same. You know, she may end up in a similar situation to that old man when she gets older. And now a lot of her anxieties get passed on to her daughter. So this is where we see some of the generational stuff coming in. And we realize her daughter has her own anxieties about her mom leaving her, potentially, you know, that perhaps there will be a time, a day when her mom just decides to leave and go wherever. And her mom hasn't necessarily given her any reason to believe she's gonna leave. There's something that happens early on in the Amsterdam chapter that causes that fear to take root in the in the daughter. Her name is Qali. So I won't tell you what it is that happens. There's an incident, you can read it. So everyone, all in all, I think this is just a great read. If you're looking for stories for a book that really provides great insight into human behavior, into immigrant stories, into diaspora, this is the book for you. It describes to us how war creates so much displacement, and not just physical, but also mental and emotional displacement, and how sometimes that displacement is passed on over generations. The ending of each chapter or of each short story is very literal, yet so full of meaning. I find that you'll need to reread the endings. She ends them in a way that is so urgent, so very literal in what she's conveying, but there's this sense of urgency in the endings that made me, again, pause. And then I had to go back and reread to say, what's really happening here at the end of each story? All right, so that's it for this book, The Private Apartments. Make sure to get your copy. I got mine from my local library, and you know, I loved it so much that I'm not gonna purchase a copy online, and I'm gonna gift it to a friend who I know will really love it. And I'm really proud of the author for doing this book and for sharing it with us, because it's very courageous and it takes a lot to share these kind of stories. While they're all fiction, of course, they capture realities experienced by so many immigrants and refugees across the world, and especially right here in Canada. So make sure you get your copy.